While there are two types of aggregate supply, there's a short run and a long run. This presentation is going to deal with the short run aggregate supply. So first off, what is aggregate supply? It is a schedular curve showing the level of real domestic output that all firms will produce at each price level. Just like aggregate demand deals with all the demand in the entire country for products, the aggregate supply deals with the total amount of products and services that will be supplied in a given period of time. So basically, at any given point, aggregate supply is equal to real GDP because both are measures of outputs. While this aggregate supply curve may not look like the supply curve for an individual or for a market from Unit 2, each range can be related to a phase of the business cycle. So what we're looking at are three parts to the aggregate supply curve. If you don't know what the business cycle is, you may need to go back and review an earlier lesson on what is the business cycle. The three phases are the horizontal phase, the intermediate phase, and the vertical phase. Take some time and look at the graph now and see if you can't determine what phase of the business cycle each phase of the aggregate supply curve is, or see if you can't walk through in your head the relationship at each phase between price level and output, or quantity, or real GDP. Pause here if necessary. In the horizontal range, levels of real output are occurring with many resources still unemployed. Basically what that means is that the economy is in a recession. It also means that the relationship between real GDP and price level is real GDP can increase or output can increase without having inflation or a change in the price level. The intermediate range shows expansion of real output is now accompanied with a percentage change in price level or rising price level. The economy achieves full employment in this stage and may reach its potential output. Potential output is something we'll deal with when we talk about the long-run aggregate supply. This range implies that the economy is in the expansion phase of the business cycle. Finally, the vertical range. Aggregate demand continues to increase into this range. The only change will be in price level. No additional output can occur since the economy is already operating at its full capacity and above full capacity. So this range implies that the economy has hit its peak and is only seeing rises in the price level or rises in inflation, which is something that the government will eventually have to fix and bring the price level and inflation down. So if we move from left to right, showing the aggregate demand curve as it intersects with the aggregate supply curve in the three phases, we start with recovery out of a recession, eventually hitting expansion, and then if aggregate demand continues to increase, it eventually hits the peak. Output cannot increase anymore at this point. We're only moving up and down in terms of price level. Now, when we say aggregate demand intersects the aggregate supply curve within one of these ranges, that indicates where we are in the economy currently. We'll deal with graphing the equilibrium point, but that's what we're going to be talking about later, is that if aggregate demand hits supply or aggregate supply in this phase, then we are currently at a peak. If this is our aggregate demand curve, we're in an expansion because this is where aggregate demand and aggregate supply meet in the intermediate phase. Or if it's on the horizontal phase, we know that the economy is in a recession only because that's where aggregate demand meets aggregate supply. There are three reasons why short-run aggregate supply would shift. Shift it to the right to increase, shift it to the left to decrease. One would be input prices. If resource prices are lower, for example, gasoline is used in the production of many goods or the transportation of many goods, aggregate supply will increase or vice versa. Productivity. Any technology, improved capital, will result in more productive resources and therefore an increase in aggregate supply. More technology, better technology equals more production equals an increase in short-run aggregate supply. The last one we'll deal with in the next slide, legal institutional environment. That means things like business taxes and subsidies and government regulations. You may also make the connection between aggregate supply and the production possibility frontier. If the economy can be more productive, you shift the curve outwards. If the country becomes less productive, you shift the curve inwards on the production possibility frontier. Same thing with short-run aggregate supply. If we're able to buy more resources, for example, aggregate supply would increase because if I hire more workers I assume would make more products. My supply, or the aggregate supply, goes up. If technology helps to improve, remember we'd shift the production possibility curve out. In this case, aggregate supply would also shift to the right, increasing production, increasing the short-run aggregate supply. Legal institutional environment deals with what businesses have to pay, or if they have to jump through more or less hoops. So if business taxes decrease, businesses have more money to hire more workers. If they hire more workers, they produce more stuff, more goods, more services. Or if subsidies help businesses produce more, they give more money to the businesses then hire more workers, but hire more capital to produce more goods and services. It's an increase in aggregate supply, an increase in output. If there is less government regulations, there's less hoops to jump through, this will also increase aggregate supply. Or vice versa. If I give you the example, we are making, everything in the United States, and let's say all other things equal, if I'm the government and I'm going to figure out a government regulation for those who produce lemonade, if I state as the government, and I'm able to enforce this, that anybody who makes a glass of lemonade, or a gallon of lemonade, let's say, must do it A, by hand, and B, the individual making the gallon of lemonade must perform proper 25 push-ups to make 1 gallon. That increases the amount of hoops that the individual or the business has to jump through, and all other things remaining equal, that business now has produced less lemonade because it takes them longer to produce each gallon. If you can imagine somebody standing making a gallon of lemonade by hand, having to perform 25 proper push-ups before each gallon. That means that each worker is less productive, or producing less, which would decrease supply. And if all other things in the economy are equal, ceteris paribus, we would have a decrease in aggregate supply.